two souls that the Rebbe mentions in Tanya, the natural soul, the human soul, and then the little piece of God from above. This changes the entire focus, the entire orientation of our service of God from what was conventionally understood to be the war, the battle between good and evil, and places us in a completely different battlefield, and that is the war between the natural and the godly. It used to be that we understood the struggle or the challenge to consist of two inclinations, the good inclination and the evil inclination. An inclination means a tendency, a leaning, a mood, a disposition. Sometimes we're in a good mood and we want to do good things. Sometimes we're in a bad mood, we want to do bad things. There's a streak in us that is evil and enjoys being spiteful and sinful and so on. And then there's a streak in us that enjoys being good and doing the right thing and so on. And so it was assumed that the battle rages between these two inclinations. And so we have the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, and the Yetzer Hatov, the good inclination. What the Alter Rebbe is introducing to us in Tanya is a whole new thought, and that is that we actually have two souls, not two inclinations, two complete souls, which means two complete personalities, not a bad mood. A natural soul with all the conditions, properties, and tendencies of a natural soul. And then we have a godly soul with all its properties, tendencies, and characteristics. The human soul is mortal. The human soul has self-awareness, ego, a survival instinct, etc., etc., etc. The godly soul is not mortal. It doesn't have a survival instinct. It doesn't have an ego. It is here to serve. It is of God, present on earth, to serve earth, to make the world a more godly place so that God can be comfortable and at home in his lowest creation, which is our world. This soul we refer to in our prayers every morning. When we thank God for returning our soul, we describe it as the soul you breathed into me. This soul is pure, this soul is holy, this is not of the earth, this is of God. But in the process of being born, which means when the soul leaves its lofty perch, its place of origin within God, and comes down through the infinite chain of worlds, it is affected by those worlds as it passes through them. By the time it becomes earthbound, by the time it gets to the body at the moment of conception, or maybe even earlier, it has undergone some transformations. It doesn't look the way it once looked. It doesn't function the way it once functioned. It's lost some of the qualities, it's lost some of the sensitivities, it's lost some of the wisdom. It is traumatized in the process of birth. Every birth is traumatic. And so the Rebbe compares this to the fetus developing in the womb. Now, if we trace the origins of the fetus as far back as we can trace it, we locate the origins, the first stirrings of this fetus in the brain of the parent, of the mother and father. Yet, what is born from this original brain stuff of the father and mother is not another brain, it's another human being. And another human being means a fetus that has a brain, but it also has a toenail. Now, this toenail isn't coming from some other source. It too comes from the stuff of the parent's brain, But in the course of the 9 months of the pregnancy, it undergoes some transformations and therefore doesn't look like a brain, doesn't function like a brain, it can't think, it doesn't understand, it has no memory, conscious memory. It has become a toenail. And yet there's no question that even the toenail is rooted and originates in the same source as the brain of the fetus. And ultimately, it is of the same stuff, because that's all the stuff there is. So it is as much a part of the miracle of birth as is the brain of the fetus. And so there is always this connection between the child born and the parents who created the child, even if it's the toenail of the child that we're talking about. So the same is true with souls. Every godly soul originates in God's thought. In the process of birth, it undergoes some changes, but it is not the essential stuff that changes. It doesn't become ungodly, it just functions less godly. And that's why at any time, even the souls of our generation, so inferior in talent to the souls of earlier generations, yet even our souls are capable of truly serving God with a genuine and sincere service. And it is therefore possible, and happens quite often, that great souls, very lofty, saintly souls, are born to parents who are not very special at all. Because the soul itself is not affected by the parent's behavior, by the parent's quality of life. When the Zohar says that the state of the child being born is determined primarily by the sanctity of the parents at the time of conception, when they are conceiving the child, which seems to be saying that the child's soul is affected by the parent's sanctity or lack of sanctity. The Rebbe explains that this is referring to the garment of the soul and not to the soul itself. The parents who sanctify themselves at the time of conception produce for their child a pure and sensitive garment which their soul will use in expressing itself, in fulfilling the commandments, and in receiving its energy and life from God. Parents who do not sanctify themselves at the time of conception provide for their child a more coarse or callous garment that is not as sensitive, that is not as responsive to holiness and to good things as it could be. But the soul itself is not determined, is not affected by the holiness or lack of holiness of the parents. The soul itself has its own destiny. It is a part of God that comes down into this world to do its share in making the world a divine resting place, a home for God. And the parents' quality, holiness or lack of holiness, doesn't change the godliness of the soul. To give the soul a head start, to give it every benefit and advantage possible, parents should sanctify themselves at the time of conception so that the garment that the child's soul, that the baby's soul, will use in the course of its life will be a sensitive garment, a responsive garment, a soft garment, enabling the child to react or respond to that which is holy, godly, special, without resistance. And this garment, as we'll see in later chapters, this garment refers primarily to the garment of thought. Because the soul has three garments: thought, speech, and action. Garments are the ways through which the soul expresses itself. The soul can communicate with itself by thinking. The soul will communicate with other human beings by speaking. And the soul will communicate with objects through acting. But primarily, it's the garment of thought that determines the quality of a child's life. What thoughts, which ideas are going to appeal to the child most? And we see some children, every negative thought, every negative idea, every kind of trouble possible, they are the first ones there, all the time. Nothing slips by them. If it's unholy and unwholesome, they'll pick it up. They'll catch on, they will enjoy it, they will respond to it, they will feel at home with it, comfortable. We see other children who by nature and by birth respond to what is nice, to what is good, to what is sensitive. Wherever something wonderful is happening, they're always there. They're part of it somehow. They've got this radar, and they hone in on everything positive, everything nice. They feel comfortable with nice things. They feel comfortable with godly things. If it's a mitzvah, they're there. And that's primarily because of the garment of thought, the innocence, the purity of their thought garment. And this is determined by the sanctity of the parents at the time of conception, which is, to pick only one example, which is why parents should not be intimate and should not risk conceiving a child if they're angry at each other, if they're hateful to each other, if they're drunk, or if they're thinking about someone else. Because that will produce for the child a coarse garment, not a sensitive garment. And to give the child a head start, of course, a garment can be cleaned, a garment can be overcome, but it's an obstacle, it's a difficulty. To give the child a pure, sensitive, clean garment, parents should sanctify themselves at the time of conception. Great souls will sometimes, or often, be born to parents who are not at all great. And one of the reasons for this is because God created the world with a balance between the holy and the unholy. Because of this balance, we are capable of freedom of choice. The godly is not so obvious that we will choose it automatically. And the ungodly is not so clearly evil that we would automatically reject it. We have freedom of choice because there's a balance. The ungodly seems as true, as convincing, as appropriate as the godly, and the godly seems to be as optional as the ungodly. That's what keeps the balance, that permits us to act freely, to choose the good, not be compelled by it, and to choose the evil if we so desire. When a godly soul comes into the world, it of course adds weight to the godly side of the scale. If it's a great godly soul, it can tilt the scale to such a degree that we no longer have freedom of choice. The volume of godliness so far outweighs the ungodly that the freedom of our choice is interfered with. To keep the balance, so that we can maintain our freedom of choice, these great godly souls come into the world concealed behind what is ungodly. For example, Abraham was born to the idolater, the idol maker of the generation, to his father Terach. Rivka was born to a family that was unholy. Uh, every time something vastly holy comes into the world, it is balanced by being concealed, by distraction. The birth of Moses, for example, went unnoticed because there was so much distraction. There was the enslavement, there was the taskmasters, little boys were being killed, and so his birth went unnoticed. He slipped into the waters of this world without creating too many ripples. And so at times, a great soul will be born to parents who themselves don't have great souls. But even the soul that is not great is godly. We have a Sunday night program for VIPs that you might be interested in. It's informal, it's questions and answers, it's conversation. It's really relaxed, it's really pleasant, enjoyable, informative, and kind of community-like. It's a Sunday night program. There's a Wednesday morning program for the VIPs, and there's a Wednesday night program. All of it just conversation, casual, laid back, unscripted. So join us, take a look, click the link below and see which of the three suits you best, and join us for some enjoyable conversation.